Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in Torah. All right, I want to welcome everyone here tonight, and we're going to be studying the last 8 verses of Daniel chapter 9, the 70 weeks, and try to give an explanation of some of that, and maybe some ideas that you may or may not have thought about before. So before we begin, though, I want to just review from last week. Daniel had been studying the writings of the prophet Jeremiah regarding the time of exile of the Jews from Jerusalem in particular, and from Israel in general. He was questioning when the exile would end. He knew it must be close, but did not know exactly, because he didn't know when the 70 years when it actually began. When was it? When Daniel was taken from Babylon, or some later date? Now, when facing situations like this, of course, Daniel did what he did so many times. He turned to prayer. And we saw that Daniel prayed for Israel, confessing their sins, not making any excuses. So his was a model for us today. And so then we'll begin on chapter 9 and verse 20. While I was still speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people, Israel, and presenting my supplication before Adonai, my God, on behalf of the holy mountain of my God, yes, while I was praying, Gabriel, the one I had seen in the earlier vision, came to me swiftly about the time of the evening offering. Now, it says, while Daniel was still praying. Now, I don't really know how long he had been in prayer, but for Daniel to actually pray the prayer that he was praying, and to get all of the stuff in that he was praying about, because certainly Israel had a lot of sins that he had to confess. It might have been a long time, or I don't know if we could say he had been praying for hours or just minutes. It could have been just a little while. But what we do know is that while he was praying, it says that the answer was dispatched. The answer did come. It was started on its way. So that's kind of a lesson for us today. Have we been praying for something? Some of us, maybe we've been praying for someone, maybe a loved one, or something that a long-term thing. We've been praying for that person for a long time. Well, sometimes you think, well, maybe God isn't listening, or didn't hear, or what, but just keep praying, because the answer is on its way. It may not be as fast in coming as what we would like to, but the answer is on the way. Yeshua said that in Matthew 6 and 8, he said, your Father knows the things that you have need of before you ask him. So whenever there seems to be a delay in the answer to prayer, there's a reason for the delay. And when it's right to do it, God can answer prayer immediately, and we've all seen those kinds of prayers. And sometimes God answers prayer even before we pray. If you look in Isaiah 65 and 24, it says, it came to pass that that before they call, I will answer, and while they are still speaking, I will hear. Now, so God knows what we need even before we ask it. And it just reminded of scripture in the New Testament where it says, when we don't know how to pray, then the Holy Spirit prays for us. And it says with groanings that we may not even understand. So depending on the translation that you're using here for this, for Daniel, this verse here of Daniel 20:21, it indicates that perhaps the angel Gabriel flew to Daniel's side. I was looking it up in some of the translations, and the one I used, it just said come swiftly, and then other ones it actually said that he flew to his side. And I got to thinking, well, where's heaven? Well, if heaven is up in the heavens, up in the sky, or wherever it might be, so how else was an angel going to come down and physically be where Daniel was, but to fly? He certainly wasn't going to take a Boeing 747. So I think, though, the idea here is that the answer came quickly. It was swiftly coming to Daniel. Daniel says that Gabriel arrived at the time of evening sacrifices. Now, that would have been between 4 and 6 p.m., something like that. And at this time, the high priest would have also brought incense to the golden altar, the incense of altar, the altar of incense. And he would have been tending the lamps of the menorah, trimming them and filling the little containers with oil so that then they would burn throughout the night. And so in Tree of Life, we've been studying about for the last 2 weeks the altar of incense and the incense itself. And the incense was a symbol of the prayers of the saints, or more generally, the prayers of the people of Israel. And so, when the priest would bring the incense and put it on the altar, the incense would go up into the air, and symbolizing that the prayers going up to God. And even more to the point was Yom Kippur, when the high priest would bring in the fire from the brazen altar, put it in the Holy of Holies. Then it said that he would come in with a double handful of incense and put it onto this fire pan, and the incense would go up and just completely fill up the upper part of the Holy of Holies. Well, if you remember, then the Holy of Holies was where God said he would dwell with the people, and so there was a cloud of glory up in that little cube called the Holy of Holies. Remember, the Holy of Holies was about 15 by 15 by 15 feet high, and so it just kind of filled up this room. And the incense being the prayers of the people, it would float up and it would mingle with the glory cloud of God, to where eventually it all became one, and the prayers of the people were right there, became part of the glory of God. And so he knew symbolically their needs, their wants, whatever it was, he was intimate with them. So that was a symbol of the incense. And so I think it's kind of interesting here that Daniel is saying that the angel came to him while he was praying at the time of the evening sacrifices. So his prayers would be going up at the same time that the prayers, the incense in Jerusalem would be going up. Had there still been a temple, of course, at this point there was no temple left, and so Daniel's prayer was going up instead of the incense. And Gabriel was dispatched. He was sent to Daniel to give Daniel understanding. Daniel had asked for deliverance. In his prayer, he had said, "Remember your people." What he was saying was, "Look, we're in exile over here in Babylon, and we're away from Jerusalem. We're away from our homes." And so Gabriel or Daniel had asked for relief. He had asked to be, that they would be able to go back home. Remember, at this point, Daniel is probably, close to 85 years old or so, something like that, in his mid-80s. And so he was getting kind of anxious. He knows that if he doesn't go home soon, he was not going to be going back because, his life would have been ended. So Daniel was asking for deliverance for him and his people. But instead, God gave to Daniel understanding. Now let me go back to, I didn't read the verses 22 and 23. Said, "He instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have come now to give you insight and understanding. At the beginning of your requests, a message went out, and I have come to declare it to you, for you are greatly esteemed. Therefore, consider the message and understand the vision." So here he was. He had asked for deliverance, and he got understanding instead. And many times, our own burdens, the things that we're going through, seem to be a whole lot harder than perhaps they are, because we don't understand why it is that we're going through a particular trial or trouble, or why is this always happening to me? Why can't I get a break? Why we all have gone through those kinds of situations where you didn't get the promotion at work, or maybe you were terminated at work for one reason or another, or your cars keep breaking down, or just the list can go on and on. My children are always sick, those kinds of things. And sometimes we just don't understand what is going on. And perhaps maybe if we understood the struggles, it'd be a little bit easier to bear the pain. I'm sure that would be the case in some of our cases, and so Daniel here is getting some understanding. Maybe that will help him to bear the exile a little bit easier. Gabriel said that as soon as Daniel began praying, the answer was headed his way. And that, I think that gives us some hope. Is as soon as he started praying, Daniel didn't have to sit there and pray for weeks and weeks or whatever. He said just as soon as he started praying, that the answer was heading his way. Now this, again, tells me that God is listening, and he knows exactly what we need even before we can articulate it. So let's go on with our verses here in 24 and 25. Daniel says, 70 weeks are decreed concerning your people and your holy city, to put an end to transgression, to bring sin to an end, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the Holy of Holies. Now, then going on, so know and understand, from the issuing of the decree to restore and build Jerusalem until the time of Mashiach, the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be rebuilt with plaza and moat, and it will be in times of distress. So we're looking at this 70 weeks here. It says 70 weeks are determined or decreed for your people and for your holy city. So a couple of things that I want to bring out about this before we go on is that this prophecy of the 70 weeks. It says it's about Jerusalem and it's about Israel. Now, a lot of the commentaries that I read have spiritualized that into saying, well, since the church now is the true Israel, then this must be somehow about the church. Well, that is, if you read things like that, that's replacement theology. And, the church has not replaced Israel. The church has its place in God's plan. Israel has their place in God's plan. They're separate, and at the same time they are connected, and they're just all part of God's plan. So this particular prophecy is about Jerusalem. It's about Israel, and it's not about the Christian church as we know it. So going on. Now, there were 6 prerequisites or things that would happen for this prophecy to come to pass. And so we would look at these to try to get an understanding of, okay, where does this 70 weeks or the 69 weeks and all that, where did it actually come to play? Now, the most of the Bible scholars and the commentators, they refer to this 70 weeks as 70 sets of 7 years. So it's a week of years, and we see this in the Bible quite often, where it talks about something going on for a number of weeks, and it's actually talking about years instead, or a unit of 7 years. And in ancient Hebrew, weeks simply means a unit of 7. And so, you remember that in Hebrew, the letters have a meaning for numbers, like Aleph is 1, Beit is 2, Gimel is 3, and so on and so forth. And again, the Jews counted their years in units of 7. According to God's instructions, they counted off their years, and every 7th year was a sabbatical, or what we would call a Shemitah. Last year we had just finished off a 7-year cycle of the Shemitah, when we're supposed to let the land rest. We're supposed to give or release people from their debts, and various other things to try to set things right again every 7 years. And then, of course, every 7 year, every sabbatical, 7 sabbaticals or 7 Shemitahs, then you would have a 50th year in there. It would be a Jubilee year. Now, the Bible also can talk about sevens, with using the word Shavua, which is a week, because remember when Jacob was working to get Rebekah's hand, to get Rachel's hand, he worked for 7 years, and then he was tricked and he got Leah instead. And so there's kind of a play back and forth in that story, where then Laban told him, he says, okay, fulfill the bride's week, and you can have Rachel, and then you work for another 7 weeks, and but it turns out to be it was a year, 7 days, and came out to be 7 years. So there is room for in Hebrew for things. It's either it could be a week, a unit of sevens, or it could be just literally a week. Now it says it's for your people and for your holy city. So the 70 weeks, they're focused strictly on the Jews and Jerusalem. So this is God's calendar here, and it's really not part of the the church's calendar, as it were. Now, what will be accomplished during these 70 years or 70 weeks? That's what turns out to be, the 490 years. Okay, it says to finish transgression. Now, this says that transgression itself will be finished. Taken literally, this means that establishing an entirely new order on earth with an end to man's rebellion against God. Then so then it says to make an end of sins. And so if we take these words at face value, that means that not only the end of the guilt of sin, but the end of sin itself. It means to seal up or restrain sin. This, of course, is a new and redeemed world. Number 3, to make reconciliation for iniquity. So man's iniquity must be reconciled to God, to God's justice and his holiness. This work was clearly accomplished at the cross. Okay. Now, number 4, to bring an everlasting righteousness. So you might take this as an individual sense, but because there have been righteous individuals. But I think this statement is talking about a new order of righteousness that is more of a corporate or a universal righteousness. Number 6 is to seal up, or 5 is to seal up vision and prophecy. And I think this speaks of both the ending and the fulfillment of prophecy, and that it ends with the final stage of history, and it culminates, of course, with the reign of the Son of God in the millennium. So, and finally, to anoint the most holy. And again, taken at its simple literal meaning, it refers to a place and not a person. And this is the Holy of Holies, the most holy place of the temple that will be anointed and blessed. So now, how does all of this stuff get? What does it mean? Now, I think that what we would have to look at is that this is, to me anyway, this is on 2 levels, because we're going to see a historical side of it, or at least its history for us today, and for Daniel it would have been prophecy. But I think that what it means is that, first of all, you had it said you're going to have a week, and then 1 week, and then 62 weeks. So I think I'm going to go to the end of this little timeline that I've got here. I didn't know really where to put it, other than I put it at the end, and then we could refer back and forth to it. But so here is kind of an idea. And some of these dates, when I put in some of the dates in our timeline there, there may be some slippage one way or the other, because not all of the scholars totally agree on what year it was. I think most of these, there was like a year difference between some of what they said it was, like when was this decree or that decree. It was was it 539 or 538? Was it 444 or 445? And so they did vary a little bit. So what we see here first is that that 7 weeks was when the first week, the 1 week, that was let me get this straight again. 7 weeks was 49 years, and that would have been the time from the decree to rebuild Israel, rebuild Jerusalem and the walls until it was actually done. It took them 49 years to do that. So let's go back up to here, and let's look at this. What decree are we talking about? Because if we're going to be talking about what this stuff means in the long run, we would need to figure out, okay, where's our starting point so that we can arrive at an ending point? And that's the problem that Daniel was having. It says, okay, this exile, where's the starting point? Was it in 506 BCE when maybe Daniel was taken captive, or was it in let's see, 593 or something, I think, when there was another raid on Israel, or was it 586 when the temple was destroyed, or was there another time later on? So Daniel was trying to figure out, okay, when is this 70 weeks up? You remember that Belshazzar, in his calculations, he had already figured out that the weeks were up, and that 70 years was done. Nothing happened. He looked around. Hey, I still got all of my Jewish folks here serving me. Ha ha! I won, and their God did not. And so that's when he was having a party. And then we know the ending of that. Then God wrote on the wall and said, "Not so fast." And so that's when Darius came in that night, and they slipped into Babylon and conquered it, and Belshazzar met his demise. So we're still looking at these. Okay, when were these decrees? When did? Because the Bible says that when you have the decree to rebuild, and so there's 4 possible decrees. And you have Cyrus' decree in 538, 539, one of those 2 years, and he made this decree giving Ezra and the Babylonian captives the right to return and rebuild the temple. All right, now and that's in Ezra 1 and 4, and then Ezra 5. Then there was a second decree that could possibly have been the starting point of this prophecy, and that would have been Darius's decree giving Ezra the right to rebuild the temple, and that was in 517 BCE, and that you'll see in Ezra 6 through 12. And then the other one is Artaxerxes' first decree, and this was giving Ezra permission, safe passage, and supplies to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, and that was in 458, somewhere in there, that time frame, 457, 458, 459. I read pretty much all 3 different dates for that. It just depends on how somebody looks at the what do they call that? The code of Cyrus, and come up with their dates on that. And then finally, there was Artaxerxes' second decree, and this was in 444, 445. That said, he gave Nehemiah permission, safe passage, and supplies to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the city and the walls. Now, only the last one of these, the second decree of Artaxerxes, that's the only one that actually said to rebuild the city and the walls rather than the temple. The other ones all said the temple. This one was the one that said the walls. So, there have been absolutely forests of trees cut down, and the paper and the oceans of ink and all that, trying to figure out, okay, when's the start of this thing? When was the end of this thing? And, there's some arguments either way on these. So, tell you what, let me stop right here and open it up. Are there any questions? Does anybody have anything to say or question or comment on for this, so far? Okay. Let me go ahead then. So, so we said that this one down here, the Artaxerxes' second decree in 444, 445, is the only one that actually speaks of Jerusalem and the the walls being rebuilt. So that's the one that I think is probably the more accurate. Now, if we go to this, go back to the verses in 25, I think it's in 25, and we're talking about Mashiach. Now, remember that Mashiach is not a Messiah. Of course, Mashiach is the word that we get from Hebrew, that where we talk about Messiah. In Hebrew, it's Mashiach. And but when we talk about Messiah in our present day Western world, we're thinking about Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah. And but what that really means is Mashiach means anointed one. So that could be just about any leader or a priest. Remember that the high priest Aaron and his sons were anointed. They poured this anointing oil on them. David and Saul and David and the kings of Israel, they were anointed. They were called the anointed ones, the Mashiach. Even Cyrus in one spot was called Mashiach because he was anointed. He was the one that was designated by God. So Mashiach can mean any king or anointed one, but it can also mean the Messiah Yeshua. And most texts that are I think for the King James Version and so forth, they will say in this verse that says the Mashiach, or the Messiah, the Prince. And so those definite articles are not there in Hebrew. It just says Mashiach and the Prince. And also remember that there were no punctuation marks in Hebrew. And so, a lot of things are just run-on sentences, and you kind of have to pick from the context, where the beginning is, where the next sentence starts, and so forth. So, so let's go ahead and just the Mashiach, the Prince, in verse 25, it could be the Roman emperor if we're talking about, and as we go into this, let me go ahead and I'll explain how I come up with that. So we don't know exactly when the starting date was, when the ending date was. Now some will say that this, the 7 weeks and the 62 weeks, so the 69 weeks ended with the birth of Yeshua. And others will say, no, it was his mikvah or his baptism, that was when the 69 weeks was completed. There are others that point out that the crucifixion was the terminal date of the 490 years. But we really don't know. And some of the explanations that or the calculations that people would come up with was the 490 years, or the 483 years. They would have to come up and say, there were some that says, okay, now, we use 365.25 days to calculate a year. And the Israelites, they used 360 days, and then every once in a while we would add an extra month just so that we could keep our calendar in play. We just did that this last year. We had, I think it was this year that we did that. We had an extra month thrown in there so that our fall festivals still stayed in the fall and our spring festivals still stayed in the spring. And so that was they would go and they would calculate this stuff out, using a 360-day calendar and so on and so forth to try to get it. And I've read some of these guys that they'll just have the most wonderful sermons about how exactly accurate this were, but then this prophecy was. But to get that calculation, they really had to twist stuff into pretzels to get their dates to come out right. And so I think that what may be important here is that the one date that we do know exactly from this prophecy, and it said that the city would be destroyed. And when did that happen? That happened in 70 AD, 70 CE, however you want to say that. That was when the temple was destroyed. The city was destroyed, and all the Jews were run out, and they were forbidden to live in the city. So we know that date. So the 483 years had to stop somewhere before that date of 70 CE. So this leaves us with only 1 week left. And so the way that the Bible is taught is they explain this. Let's go ahead and read that next the last two verses here. It says, Daniel in 26 and 27. Then after the 62 weeks, Mashiach will be cut off and have nothing. Then the people of a prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. But his end will come like a flood. Until the end of the war that is decreed, there will be destruction. Then he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on a wing of abominations will come one who destroys until the decreed annihilation is poured out on the one who destroys. Now, this, to me, these two verses are describing that last week. First of all, the end of the 62 weeks, which is actually the 69 weeks when you count that the first 7 weeks, says Mashiach will be cut off. Okay, we know Yeshua went to the cross. He died on the cross. That was he was cut off, and that's what cut off means. It means a lot of times when something is cut off, they're either killed or sometimes in the exile. The Bible talks about when you don't do some of the commandments that they should be cut off from the people, and that could mean they could be banished. But in most cases, it meant that they would be killed or executed. And so Messiah was cut off, and then the prince of a people who is to come. And that would be the Romans. They came in They destroyed the city. We know that the city was destroyed, and this end that they had, this end of these 69 weeks here, it would come in like a flood. And of course, that's what the Romans did. They came in like a flood, and it says, until the end of the war that is decreed, there will be destruction. So, Jerusalem has been in one state of destruction or another, seemed like, until just like forever, until the Jews actually got to come back into the land and started rebuilding the city again. And so then we shift over into verse 27. I think that's where the gap is between the 69 weeks and the 70th week. Then he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on a wing of abominations will come one who destroys until the decreed annihilation is poured out on the one who destroys. Now, remember in our previous studies where we're talking about the beast with the horns, and you got the last beast with the 4 horns, and then one horn comes out, or the 10 horns, and then the one horn came out that it was small, but then he uprooted 3 of the other horns. That one small horn was the basically the Antichrist. It described what will be the Antichrist, and so we have to look at this reading of 26, that it was the Mashiach, Yeshua, who was killed, and said left with nothing, and it will have nothing. And a lot of the people looked at his death, and they concluded that his life was all in vain, because they were looking for a Mashiach, a Messiah that would liberate them from the Romans, and they were not looking for the Mashiach ben Yosef, the Messiah of the suffering servant Joseph. They were looking for the Mashiach ben David, the Messiah, son of David, who was going to come in as a conqueror and basically kick the Romans out and secure their freedom. So what we see there is then wow, it says the people of the prince to come. Now that would be the Roman Empire. Again, this is Daniel speaking from the 6th century BCE, and so here he is talking about the Romans. That's a future empire. Would be they were the ones that came in and destroyed Jerusalem. Now, I think it's kind of interesting that there was about 40 years between the death of Yeshua until the temple was destroyed. And I don't know, I was thinking about it today. The thought occurred to me. It says it's almost like the Israelites in the desert. They had a chance to enter the promised land. After the 12 spies came back in, and only Joshua and Caleb were giving positive reports. All the other ones said, no, we can't do it. So the people did not enter into the land because of unbelief. They were, they delayed. In fact, those people never entered the land because they were then disciplined by God and said, okay, nobody that's over 20 years old is going to enter the promised land. And so in the next 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, everyone that was over the age of 20, except for Joshua and Caleb, they entered. They were died off and were not allowed to enter the promised land. It's kind of like the Jews of Yeshua's day, that they had an opportunity to accept the Messiah when he first came, And many of them did accept him, but many, many more did not accept him. So at when he was sacrificed, that they had rejected Yeshua. So the next 40 years, the Talmud tells us that the string or the cord that they would dip in the goat's blood, that was sacrificed, they would tie that cord onto the gates of the temple, and that when the atonement was made for the people, and the scapegoat was sent out of the city and led off into the wilderness, that scarlet cord, the one that had been dipped in the blood, it turned white, and that had been going on for years and years and years, and that showed that the sins of the people had been atoned for. But at the destruction, or after the crucifixion of Yeshua, and the veil in the temple had been torn from top to bottom, the Talmud says that the 40 years before the temple was destroyed, that cord never turned white again. So it's kind of like the Jews wandering around, the Israelites wandering around in the wilderness because of their unbelief. Then the Jews of Yeshua's day, they could have accepted salvation by believing in Yeshua, and yet they did not. So their worship wandered, as it were, and without atonement for 40 years in a spiritual wilderness. And so, eventually said, okay, God said, this is the end of it. We've had enough. And then Rome was allowed to destroy the temple. So, the last week of this prophecy, I keep forgetting my slides here, but there is that large gap, I think, between the 69th week back at the destruction of the temple, and then the 70th week, which is going to be describing the end time, the tribulation time. Now, this gap, I believe, is allowing for the time, or the fullness of the Gentiles. And some people will call this the church age. And so I think that the last week begins when the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Now, when is that? That's open to speculation. I personally believe that it's possible that the time of the Gentiles was fulfilled, and basically, when in the 67 war, when Jerusalem was finally liberated, and the whole city came under the authority of the Israeli government, then that kind of signaled an end to the age or the time of the Gentiles. The fullness of the Gentiles had come. So it's not something that there's people that argue that way and others that argue another way, but it could have been. It could be that the age of the Gentiles was in 67, and so now we're just looking forward every day to okay, well, when is all this stuff going to start up on the 7th week? Now, I contend that this last week that Daniel is talking about here, which will be seven years, it could not have started until Israel was back in the land. Well, when did Israel come back into the land officially? It was in 1948 when they had their own country again. That the United Nations returned the land to them, and they were recognized as a nation. And then the other one, of course, is the Jerusalem United in 1967. And I personally think that it was a mistake by Moshe Dayan, who was the prime minister at the time of the 67 war, that he allowed the Muslims, he allowed those people that had been there in charge of the Temple Mount and all that kind of stuff. He allowed them to stay in charge of the Temple Mount. I believe that was a mistake, but it's more likely it's all in God's timing. And maybe that's, I look at it as a mistake, but God said, no, that's just putting some brakes on some of the things that were going to have to happen. So the other thing is that a new temple will have to be built in Jerusalem. And I believe it will be built on the Temple Mount, right where it originally was. There are some who say, well, they could actually build the temple over in a corner of the Temple Mount, so that they don't have to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque or the Dome of the Rock. But I cannot imagine that God is going to allow a temple to be built within the shadow of these I call Antichrist buildings that are there today. So I believe that a new temple will have to be built. And why is that? Because the Bible talks about it talks about this covenant, and how that 3.5 years into this covenant, then it will be broken, and then the Antichrist will do something in the temple, set it up, kind of like Antiochus Epiphanes did back in 165 BCE, if I remember right, the date's right, where he erected a statue of Zeus, and they were sacrificing pigs at the temple. And so there will be something like that in the new temple that will be built in the next few years, that will be called that abomination. So anyway, that's what I look at right now. We're just going to, in our studies so far, we're going to look at this 70th week, this last week, only at a high level, and just as okay, here's where that's going to be. Future studies as we go on, we'll talk about in depth, a little bit more in depth as to, okay, what's going to happen during that 70th week, and why is that? And so anyway, I've got your timeline, a good timeline for you here. Now, it does, a lot of these timelines, it's hard to find one that matches exactly the way I believe, because it talks about the approximate time of the rapture of the saints here. Let me see if I can get this spot right here where it's talking about that. Okay, so many of you know that I feel like that in terms of the idea of the rapture is not going to be. I don't believe it's going to be like what has been taught for the last 150 years in the church. Some of you do. I know even Messianic rabbis that we have discussed it, because they believe that there will be a physical rapture of the church at the beginning of the tribulation, and that all the believers will be gone. I can't read it that way, but anyway, I look at this catching away as being right at the end of the tribulation, and where we will actually be caught up with the Lord in the sky, and then eventually and immediately return to earth in a glorified body. But we'll get into all of that kind of stuff, and we can argue over that later on. And we'll come back in the glorified body, and then Battle of Armageddon, and that will usher in the millennium. So that concludes what I've got for tonight, talking about that 70th week, or the